Probably can hear me better now. Hey, let me get Joe on here.
Catherine, hello.
Hi,
Hello, and hi. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am. That's a loaded question, my dear. That's a very loaded question.
I
It's an
know.
incredibly loaded question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going on with this screen. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay, no
That's
worries.
that's much better. That is
Yeah,
much better now. Yeah.
cool.
All right, we're crisp. All right. You know what? It's crazy. For as many live videos as I've done before, I've never been the person that's, I guess, in a mathematical perspective, the denominator. I've never been the person on the bottom. I'm normally the person on top. So it's strange to kind of be in this spot where it's like, okay, hey, I'm waiting for somebody to talk to me. So yeah, it's
Totally.
crazy, but it's cool. It's good. How are you? Everything all
Good.
right?
Yeah, things are as
Cool.
good as they can be in this time. So,
Mm,
yeah,
hmm.
I think everybody's
Hmm.
pretty exhausted and uh anxious, to say the least. It's a
Oh yeah, there's a
yeah.
lot going on. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, that's much better. Actually, I like this lighting better. Yeah, this is
Oh yeah.
sexy now. Now, look. Yeah, 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 yeah. I feel a bit more comfortable now.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I feel a bit more comfortable. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So other than that, you know what, Captain, everything's all right. Everything, and I say all right, not necessarily as a platitude, but I say all right because, you know, what else is going to happen? What else am I going to do? What else is coming down the pike? What else is Trump going to say? What other cops are going to drop flashbang grenades and tear gas a reporter? I mean, in all serious, I mean, I'm sure you're watching the news in Canada where you are in Toronto.
Yeah.
You got reporters right now looking like they're playing Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Seriously, they got full-on face masks, full-on headgear, helmets, body armor, and I'm like, what in the world is going on here? What's happening?
Yeah, for real. It's 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 I don't even have words. This is the time I feel responsible to step up because of the skin color that I have, because I have privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I mean, as uncomfortable as it is sometimes for those of us who are white, man, it's time. Like we've been on the sidelines for too long,
I
and
agree.
allowing our, white guilt or white fragility or whatever, white privilege to control ourselves in an individualistic sense, but that
Mm-hmm.
perpetuates the systemic oppression that Black people have been facing for hundreds of years. So, man, I just want to thank you initially, like right off the bat, I guess, for
Yeah. Well, well,
being
well,
willing to chat about this
well.
stuff. I know we've had a
You
dialogue
know what?
before, but man,
Yeah, of course,
this
plenty
is
of times, plenty of times. Yeah,
yeah,
but it's never really been on camera. It's usually, yeah, it's usually. Hell, last time I was at your place with a bunch of French fries at the one place, at one
yeah,
restaurant right near your apartment. So, yeah.
totally.
And then the other time before that, it was on the Sunshine Coast over the summertime. So yeah. So, but you're welcome, first of all, and second of all, I don't mind having these conversations because these conversations are part of who I am.
Yeah,
I am a black person in the United States, and I understand what it is to be black and be in America. And I'm saying that, and I'm purposely saying it that way because I don't necessarily understand what it means to be a black American. Because my parents are not from the United States, nor am I. My parents are from Trinidad. I was born in England. So simply by basis of my birth certificate and my parents' birth certificates, I am not American. I'm a naturalized American citizen, but I my parents weren't born here, and they didn't have to go through the civil rights era. My grandparents weren't born here, and they didn't have to go through Jim Crow. My great grandparents weren't born here, and they didn't have to go through sharecropping. My born here, and they didn't have to be recently freed slaves by way of the 14th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation. So, of I don't consider myself a Black American. And I'm sure, given everything that I just described to you, Catherine, many people, I'm sure many Black Americans would not look at me and say, "Oh yeah, he's a Black American." But many white people will look at me and say, "Oh, he's Black. He's got to be a Black American."
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, all of that being said, though, I mean, there's systemic repression and rooted in colonialism for all of your ancestry as well. So not to discount that, but right now, I know what you mean as far as right now being an important moment for North America in the Black Lives Matter movement. So yeah,
It's breaking up for
yeah.
some
I
reason.
mean, how? Oh yeah, mine is a little bit too. Let me see. What? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna be able to fix that, but just let me know if it gets worse, I guess. So, yeah, I guess my first question was, you've been talking on your stories about sort of the four fights: the fight for humanity, the fight for freedom, the fight for equality. Oh, I might have lost you. And the fight for survival, which is the fourth one. I don't know. It broke up a bit there.
Yeah, it broke up a lot. It broke up a whole lot.
Dang. So I was just saying, I don't know if it's still working, but
It's
I was
good
just
now. It's
saying I
good now. We're
wanted
good
to
now.
chat. Okay, good, good, good. I wanted to chat
Yes.
about something you've been talking about recently in your stories, which is the four fights: the fight for humanity, freedom,
Mm-hmm.
equality, and
Mm-hmm.
survival.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it
Yes.
really compelling when the other day you were saying that sort of this COVID-19 pandemic circumstance has pushed these concepts into white people's uh, into their minds, I guess, because they're seeing just a small glimmer of what it's like to sort of kind of be oppressed just because we're having to be in these lockdown situations. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm wondering if you can speak to that and sort of explain what the four fights are, I guess, just in a
Yeah.
general sense, and
Yeah, of
then we
course.
can
Of
we can
course.
chat about it.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, I mean, and I kind of alluded to this on my Instagram stories the other day, and I said, you know what, Black people for over 400 years have had four fights that they've had to deal with: the fight for humanity, the fight for freedom, the fight for equality, and the fight for survival. When you talk about Black people in the United States having to fight for humanity, we could discuss slavery, indentured servitude, convict leasing. Let's not forget, Catherine, at one point, Black people were used as collateral to secure loans for other plantations. Black people were traded for livestock. At one point in American history, Black people were thought of to be three-fifths of a human being. So there's the fight for humanity. All right. Then the fight for freedom, the Emancipation Proclamation. And then after that, the 13th Amendment, which essentially abolished slavery. Then the 14th Amendment of the United States, which gave everybody equal protection under the law. Then the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution gave everyone the right to vote. Okay, that's a fight for freedom. Hey, I'm allowed to vote. I can do my thing. All right. Then equality. Okay, dealing with Reconstruction in the early 1900s, dealing with Jim Crow and segregation, then dealing with affirmative action, and then dealing with the Civil Rights Act. That's the fight for equality. Hey, you know what? A Black person can do something just as well as a white person. Black people are deserving of the same opportunities as white people. Equality. Now it's a fight for survival. Why? White supremacy and everything that comes with white supremacy. Okay, everything that comes with white supremacy. It's driving while black. It's jogging while black. It's it's watching a bird while black. But it's the flip side of that too. It's being a Karen. It's that. Okay, that is also a form of white supremacy. It's having a white. It's having a white supremacist in the White House. I mean, it's called. I mean, let's. Kat, let's not mince words. There's a reason why it's called the White House. And it doesn't necessarily meant to be, oh, hey, it's because it's painted white, okay? I think the subliminal messaging is not nearly as subliminal as we think it is, all right? Every president that's been a president up until President Barack Obama was a rich white guy. And even Obama wasn't black. He was biracial. He had a white mom and a Kenyan father, all right? And I'll go as far as to say this. Barack Obama is a white supremacist. But we'll talk about that later on. You asked me to talk about the fights, okay? So now now it's a matter of survival. COVID-19 hit, everybody's privileges were removed, and this includes white people. Now, for the most part, white people are now having to deal with these 4 fights for the better part of about 2 or 3 months. Now the context for the fights that white people have are slightly different, okay? So for white people, it's, wait a minute, I've lost my job. And for many people, your job is who you are. It's, to borrow a French term, it's a raison d'etre, your reason for being. It's your way of life. A job gives you a purpose and dignity. It's your sense of humanity. It makes up your individual humanity. A lot of white people have lost their jobs. It's not, wait a minute, I used to be a known bartender at the corner. Everybody knows my name. I can't go serve out drinks anymore, or I can't be a waitress at this high-end restaurant. This is what I enjoy doing. This is who I am. People know me for this, and I can't do that anymore. Now what am I going to do? All right? Freedom for white people and for black people. For white people, now it's, you're in quarantine, can't go out for 14 days. If you want to leave your house, you got to wear a mask. And we understand what freedom is. Freedom is the ability to do what you want when you want. And now people aren't able to do that. So you're taking my freedom from me. I don't like that. All right? Equality. How come $4.3 trillion of taxpayers' money or the Federal Reserve's money went to the richest 1% in the United States? And corporations got bailed out, but people didn't get bailed out. And all I received is a $1,200 check and maybe unemployment benefits. That doesn't sound fair. That's not equal. Wait a minute. That's not fair. And my uncle told me years ago, I said, you know, Uncle Ansel, that's not fair. And he looked at me in the eyes and said, Jojo, because he used to call me Jojo. Jojo, because my dad's name is Joe. He goes, Jojo, fair is a place where they judge horses and pigs and you buy cotton candy. And I never forgot that. So it's like, okay, well, shit isn't really fair at this point. All right? And then survival. For white people, the survival scenario goes like this. Well, how am I going to pay my rent? Where's my next meal coming from? I used to have health insurance. Now I don't have health insurance. What am I going to do? What happens if I get sick? What if I get evicted? Who do I turn to? Who's going to help me? Okay? So now, do you see the difference in context in terms of the 4 fights between black people and white people? But now, white people are beginning to understand what it's like to live life as most black people live in the United States.
Yeah.
And black people have lived like this for centuries. White people, for the most part, have lived like this for about 90 days.
Yeah.
And white people are just like, the hell with this. I don't like this at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, black people, you know what? We should have listened to you when Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed took a knee in silent protest. You know what? We're sorry. Okay? You know what? Martin Luther King, you know, we shouldn't have assassinated you. Sorry about that. You know what, Malcolm X? You know what? When you said by any means necessary, we didn't quite understand it because you were a bit too militant for us. But you know what? Everything you're saying right now, yeah, you said it 60 years ago. It does make a lot of sense. Okay? Do you see where I'm going with this? Okay?
Yeah.
So now white people are now having to deal with this the grips of this pandemic, but it's so closely related to black life in the United States that now people are saying, you know what? Shit, this is what it's like to be a black person to a certain extent in the United States. All right, but you know what? It's a little bit, and we're seeing it play itself out now with these protests. Okay, sure, there are some black people being shot in these protests, but there's a whole lot of white people getting shot too. So now it doesn't even matter if you're a black person that's protesting, because it used to be, hey, black people will get shot during a protest, no big deal. It's just another black person that just got shot by a police officer. But now you're seeing white people get shot by police, and you're seeing white women getting shot by police. okay? And the most protected and most privileged person in the United States is the white woman. So now it's just like, whoa, what the hell? White women are going out saying, well, shit. Look, at this point, white women in the United States can't go ahead and call their manager and have this fixed. You can't say, hey, look, I want to speak to your manager. It doesn't work that way now, okay? So now this is why these protests have become not only considerably more vigorous and more active, but they've become more multiracial and more gender. There's different genders involved. It's no longer just a black person, typically a black female struggle, okay? It's no longer black men standing up saying, hey, look, don't stand up, don't, hands up, don't shoot. There's now white people saying, you know what? I'm sick of this bullshit. I'm tired of this government that's oppressing me, and I've been oppressed for the better part of a season. When black people have been oppressed for the better part of centuries. Yeah. Okay? So that's part of the reason why I said that, Catherine, because I wanted to make sure that people understand that in years past, and I'm not saying that the racism is over, far from it. It's actually quite worse now than it was before. But people who are now being oppressed, white people who are now feeling the effects of this pandemic and having to deal with these 4 fights that I just outlined and highlighted to you over the past few minutes, are now understanding what black life is about in the United States. And then now it's, wait a minute, how do I deal with this? How do I cope with this? And this is exactly why there are so many white people having more conversations with black people now. Because in months and in years and in decades and in centuries past, white people never had to deal with these sorts of fights because white people were privileged. So that's the very definition of white privilege. You don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. You don't have to worry about how you're going to pay your rent. You don't have to worry about health insurance. You don't have to worry when a cop pulls up behind you if you're going to live or die. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about getting a job because, hey, white privilege is going to make sure that you, even though you might be less skilled than the black candidate, you are going to get that job because you're white. You don't have to worry about these things, okay? And now everybody, for the most part, is in the same boat. It's in the same Titanic that is slowly sinking. But even in the Titanic, there were different levels of service that you could receive. So in terms of that sort of Titanic, this massive ship that represents the United States that is slowly sinking because it hit an iceberg, and the proverbial iceberg is the COVID-19 pandemic, black people are still sort of at the bottom underneath the boat. If you remember the movie Titanic, when the band was there, that band that was playing and the water's starting to fill up the drum set, it starts getting a whole lot of water in it, that band is sort of representative of black people in the United States. But guess what? The Asians and the Latino community and some of the poor white people that are on the higher levels of this boat, guess what? That boat is still going to sink and we are all going to drown. We are all going to drown. All right? So I don't want to sound so confrontational when I say this, but I'm saying it for not necessarily for effect, but to explain it further. All right? There was a time, and I think even with regards to this whole white privilege, that white people were in an adversarial relationship with black people, and that quite honestly, it has been that way. Gandhi years ago once said, "My enemy's enemy is my friend." Okay? So now what we're seeing is white people understanding, well, you know what? I have to fight for freedom. I have to fight for humanity. I have to fight for survival. All right? I got to fight for equality. Well, wait a minute. This is the same stuff that black people have to fight for. Wait a minute. But I used to hate black people because they weren't supposedly working as hard, or they weren't as smart, or they weren't as disciplined, or they didn't have the quote-unquote social skills to survive in a corporate environment. But wait a minute, I don't have a job either. I'm not really that much different than you. So now the perceived adversarial relationship, or I shouldn't even say perceived, the real adversarial relationship that black people and white people had, and I think to a certain extent still have, it's slowly beginning to erode because there's a commonality in the struggle. There's a commonality and an affinity in the four fights that I just mentioned to you. So now when you see that a black person and a white person are now having the same struggles, it's considerably easier for white people to support black people during during all of these protests because every white person can see themselves in another black person that they're standing in solidarity with.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that that's really powerful and truthful to what's going on right now. And I think that that's why one of the main reasons why it sort of feels different this time. Like, obviously, Black Lives Matter movement has been around for several years.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so yeah, this time I've heard a lot of people say it, and I feel it too. Like, it's different this time. Someone
Right.
commented a few minutes ago just saying, the difference this time is that, you know, it's being filmed and it's being shoved into our faces as well.
Of course it
And
is. Of course
that's
it is.
true, but we've all had Facebook for like what, 10, 15 years at this point? Like,
We've
it's
had
been
camera
out
phones
there.
too.
Yeah,
We've had
yeah.
camera phones too.
This is not new. Um, and just to speak to when you mentioned that white women are getting fired at protests and getting hit with these rubber bullets, and
Yep.
um, I just wanted to, I guess, express that that's how protests should work, because when white people show up for these protests, they should be the ones putting their physical bodies between black folks and the police, because that's what this fight is about. And yeah, I think it's starting to feel real for a lot of white folks because of that. When, like you mentioned before, like when white women, the privileged folks, are getting hit with rubber bullets, it impacts people more, in the sense that other white people start paying more attention, which is messed up and so problematic. But like, man, it's time. It's time that we pay attention. It's time we start
I agree.
using our activism for something more than just posting another meme. That's important, and I do that all the time.
I know.
Knowledge is power,
Agree.
but it's not enough.
I agree.
It's
I
not
agree.
enough.
And again, kind of going back to the whole privileged white woman, which we've now dubbed as a quote unquote Karen. When you think about Karen, and the most recent instance of Karen was Central Park Karen, otherwise known as Amy
Oh, yeah.
Cooper. All
Mm-hmm.
right. When you think about Amy Cooper, there's a whole lot of information that was left out of that entire situation that I think needs to be discussed to provide a bit more context. Because it's one thing to say, okay, well, hey, here's a white woman that called the police on a black man, all right? But it's not as esoteric as that, okay? If you look at Amy Cooper's history, she was an investment banker from Franklin Templeton, okay? She's a Canadian. Excuse me. She's from Canada, all right? She went to college at the University of Chicago. If you understand anything about the University of Chicago, it's elite. It's
Mm-hmm.
elite, all right? And just you've written more than your share of academic papers, as have I. All right, you know about APA citation, MLA citation. University of Chicago actually has their own standard for citation. It's called Chicago. All
Yeah,
right,
it's
that should
very
give you an
annoying to
idea of
use.
exactly. That should give you an
Yeah,
idea of how the sort of elitism that comes with this.
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
now let's flip this around. The man, not the man holding the camera, but the man who was the recipient of all of this vitriol was a gentleman named Christian Cooper.
Hmm.
Black man, member of the New York City Audubon Society. He's a bird watcher, and care to guess where he went to college?
I don't know.
Harvard.
Okay.
Harvard. And
Yeah.
again, Harvard, another elite institution of higher learning. So again, just there's all sorts of layers to this, okay? Because again, privileged white woman looks at black guy and says, oh, well, you're just another black guy, I'm calling the cops on you, okay? And he has a bike helmet on and some glasses and some binoculars, not thinking, wait a minute, okay, you know what? Who's to say if the conversation was, oh, you know what? Oh, you went to Harvard? I might not call the cops on you. Because you know what? That all of the implications and effects that come with being someone who went to Harvard instantly kick in, and then there's all the stereotypes that come with that might prevent a Karen from calling the cops on Christian. Okay, so let's switch this back to
It
Karen.
starts to
Now you're looking.
unravel. Yeah, sorry,
You
I
see
was
what I'm
going to say
saying?
it just starts to unravel sort of the assumptions, which are clearly about race in this instance, for sure.
Yep. And you know what? And Catherine, it's not even just assumptions. It's a bit more than assumptions. There's stereotypes because
Yeah,
you have race involved now. Okay,
yeah,
it's one thing. It's one thing to have an assumption and say, okay, well, hey, you know what? It's one thing to assume and say, okay, you know what? President Trump is a racist. Well, we don't really have to assume that because he actually is a racist. It would be a stereotype to say, oh, well, hey, Joe's black. He must be good at playing basketball. When I'm terrible at basketball. My jump shot is horrible, and I can't dribble worth anything. All right? So, again, assumption, stereotype. And stereotype is an assumption where race is attached to it. And it's an
right.
unfair, you know what I'm saying? So we're going to go with
Yeah,
that. But with Central Park Karen, well, wait a minute. How did she become Central Park Karen? I don't know where she went to high school. I don't know where she went to middle school. But I would be willing to bet you that Karen in Central Park, that was her first time she's ever done it. That was the first time she's ever done it. I think the conventional wisdom would say, well, wait a minute. She knew it so well. She must have rehearsed it. She must have done this before. I think it's the other way because she grew up around people and went to institutions that foster this sort of line of thinking. That
yeah,
she went to she went to institutions that create Karens. Okay? She's just another Karen off the assembly line. Okay? So Ford makes pickup trucks. Um, Apple makes computers. And places like the University of Chicago and institutions where she worked at, like Franklin Templeton, they make Karens. She's just
yeah,
another Karen off the assembly line.
for sure. And that
She's
is
no different
something.
than Barbecue Becky or Permit Patty
Yeah,
or Corner Store Caroline. There's really no difference. All
yeah,
right, the circumstances might be different. There might be, hey, I'm a white woman and I'm gonna call the police on these brothers having a barbecue. Or wait a minute, you're illegally selling bottled water and candy. Okay, really? Okay, but the methodology, the techniques are the same. Okay,
yeah,
it's just different applications based on location. But what we need to do is really examine, how does a Karen become a Karen? All right, it's not a matter of saying, hey, what do we do to stop privileged white women calling the cops on black people? No, that's putting a Band-Aid when you need reconstructive surgery. How do we get Karens? How do we create Karens? What are Clearly Karen has a mom and a dad. What about mom and dad? Where did they go to school? What members of civic groups are they from? What institutions did they belong to create this sort of culture that creates a Karen? Who
mm-hmm,
does Karen hang out with?
mm-hmm.
Is Karen one of these white women that says, hey, I'm not racist, I have a black friend? Hey, I'm not racist, I listen to Jay-Z.
Yeah, no, you're totally right in
Okay?
this. And as someone who grew up in that kind of situation, like I grew up in a very white town
Mm-hmm.
and was exposed to all of those things, and it's so deeply ingrained in the culture of white people that
Mm-hmm.
like you're just sort of better than everyone else and you can use the police as a tool for violence. And man, like I don't mean this to distance myself from that because it's still a part of me and I still have to work on
It's where you
that
grew up.
myself. If that's who who
It's
I,
not your fault.
yeah, like that's who I was for a long time.
Yeah,
But like, man, this is the time that we need to educate ourselves and learn and unlearn all of these assumptions, because it's more than just calling the cops in a park because you're quote unquote afraid of someone who has brown skin. Like this is something you need to look at in yourself, in your heart, in your mind. And man, it's tough. I mean, I grappled and struggled with like white guilt for a long time because I was
sure.
learning all this stuff and, learning and unlearning, and I was immobilized by it for a long time,
Hmm.
and that made me
It's understandable.
silent. But that
Yeah,
silence is how the
compliance.
system can, yeah, it's complacency. So getting over that and doing
Hmm.
more than just posting memes, you know, saying you're in solidarity, but not actually taking action.
Yes.
Man, like I'm putting myself in uncomfortable situations this week because I need to, because it's time.
Good. Good.
It's yeah, and like, man, I can relate to the Karens of the world is my point, and if I can change, you can too, like
You know, I mean, Catherine, I mean, kind of to finish up with the whole Karen situation, I said, hey, you know what, I mentioned companies earlier. I said, you know, Ford makes pickup trucks. I said, Microsoft makes computers. I mean, Boeing makes airplanes, okay? Let's not forget that what Karen or Barbecue Becky or Cornerstone Caroline or Permit Patty, all right? These sorts of instances where you weaponize whiteness, okay,
mm-hmm,
when you weaponize whiteness, is a form of white supremacy. Let's not forget that the United States was founded on slavery, which is the ultimate form of white supremacy. In fact, slavery in the United States began on August 20th, 1619. The United States became an independent nation on July 4th, 1776. Okay, so as long as there is a market for cars and computers and airplanes, there's always going to be a market for Barbecue Becky and Permit Patty and Central Park Karen, because the United States of America was founded on white supremacy. Okay, and again, this sort of culture of weaponizing whiteness, especially with white women, it's not
mm-hmm,
a matter of, you can't just examine the white woman that commits the offense and think that's going to fix every other Karen that comes down the assembly line. Okay? Because these sorts of institutions, which I've equated to factories or corporations at this point, okay? If a corporation puts out a defective product, an individual defective product, you don't look at that individual product and think, okay, hey, if I fix this one part, everything else that comes from this factory is going to automatically be fixed. No, because just because you got that one bad piece, that doesn't mean you're not going to have a whole bunch of successfully built pieces that come out of that factory. In this instance, we're talking about the institutions that create a Karen. So
mm-hmm.
maybe you have a white woman who comes from these institutions that isn't actually a Karen. Okay, she's a Catherine. Okay, she's a Catherine, or she's a Kim, or she's a Joanna. Okay, so then it's like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe there's not something wrong with me. Maybe it's the places I came from. Okay, again, we so much of the conversation with race, it talks about dismantling white supremacy. Part of dismantling white supremacy is also dismantling these institutions that create
Mm-hmm.
Karens. Because
Yeah,
when you dismantle the institutions that create Karens, you cut off the assembly line to make more Karens. Okay? And then you reform these institutions so instead of getting Karens, we get Catherines, Joannas, and Kims. Does that make sense?
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think
Okay?
that's a really important thing, and something that I've been thinking about a lot is this sort of understanding the systemic issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the institutionalized racism in our lives,
Absolutely.
and what we're like, perpetuating all the time with every single thing that we do, versus the individualistic sort of ideology of like, well, I can't do anything, so I'm not gonna do anything. Or the like, oh, I posted a meme, I'm
This
on
sort
the
of
side.
boutique activism that
Yeah,
doesn't really
yeah.
do anything.
And I've been
Yeah, of
thinking about
course.
that a lot because it's hard as someone who is fairly outspoken about this stuff, and has learned a lot about it for a long
Hmm.
time. Like it's
Right.
it's almost like this weird dichotomy that I can't seem to um, bring together, or like figure out how to really talk about it, because it does oftentimes come to a discussion of systemic issues, which is very
Hmm.
theoretical, very conceptual, and like really
Hmm.
hard for someone to get how they can help in an individual way, versus like a conversation about the actual like Karens, and like the whatever she is doing in
Hmm.
whatever situation, like,
Right.
yeah, and the barbecue Becky's and all the things. So
Of course.
yeah, so I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but
Well,
I've
well,
been
well,
grappling with it.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of people have been grappling with it because it kind of goes back to what I spoke about earlier with regard to the four fights that white people are now having to deal with. So, well,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, I don't know how to deal with this, and now again, there's a whole lot of white people around the country that are having to have these difficult conversations, and especially having to have these difficult conversations with black people, because hell, we're the black people are the unofficial experts of dealing with these four fights. White people aren't, and if you don't know something, you go to somewhere or someone who can help you understand what the problems are.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why I mean, I've been in conversation with so many more people this week, more than I normally am, because there's a whole lot of white people that are like, they're just messaging me, hey, Joe, how do I learn more about this? How do I learn more about this? Where, are there any resources or any books, right? 4 months ago, I did an entire book series on my Instagram highlights that talked about, in honor of Black History Month, that talked about a lot of these issues that 4 months later we're all now having to revisit. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
damn, how come black people don't get the same opportunities for jobs that white people do? Well, if you read the book when affirmative action was white, you would understand that. Well, wait a minute, how come black people all live in these poor areas and ghettos in the United States, and how come white people live in the nice suburbs? Well, if you read, The Color of Law or Black Banking and the Racial Wealth Gap, you would understand the history of redlining and blockbusting in the United States and how the federal government endorsed and approved these racist housing policies and jacked up the prices for loans and home mortgages and home insurance for black people, but for white people, those prices actually stayed stagnant or lowered. Okay? You would learn about this stuff. So, Catherine, racism is a learned behavior. Nobody comes out of the womb. All right, and I'm 44 years old. I certainly did not come out of my mom in Southampton, England, and say, hey, you know what? I feel like being I'm going to grow up to be a racist. You know what? I'm going to grow up hating white people. I'm going to grow up hating Asian people. No. And I'm sure when you were born, you didn't come out and say, you probably asked for some milk. And then it was like, you know what? You didn't say, I feel like hating black people the rest of my life. You know what? You see these Indian people down the street? I don't like them either. And I'm going to hate them too because you know what? That's what I feel. No one does that. All right?
No.
Racism is a learned behavior. Okay? And for these Karens of the world, racism has gone beyond a learned behavior. And for white supremacists, that sort of racism has gone beyond a learned behavior. It's become a habit. It's become a way of
Yes.
life. Okay,
Absolutely.
and because it's a habit, it takes more than just retraining. It takes more than just education. Okay, it is quite literally a cultural shift that must take place. There's a wonderful book that a gentleman named by the name of Charles Duhigg wrote years ago. It's called The Power of Habit. Okay,
Mm.
and I'm going to essentially summarize this book in about 45 seconds. All right, habits can be broken and change into good habits. Habits come in what's called a habit loop. There's a cue, a routine, and a reward. Okay? The cue is the actual trigger that forces a particular activity. The routine is the activity performed as a result of the cue. The reward is the feeling that you get from performing the routine. Okay? Then there's an external factor that fuels the habit loop, and it's called a craving. Okay? So if you change the cue, you by default will have to change the routine, and then you change the reward. So, for example, smoking. All right, most smokers like to smoke simply for the social interaction of smoking on their work break. It's not necessarily because they like the taste of nicotine. Some people just like having something in between their fingers. All right, so you see it's 10:30. Okay, time for my smoke break. Okay, here's the cue. 10:30. Ding. Time to go outside to smoke. Instead of going outside to smoke, how about you just go outside and eat an apple? You change the cue. You change the routine. The cue stayed the same, change the routine. All right, what's the reward? Well, the first couple times, withdrawal. Okay, but later on, you're like, you know what? I don't really like the taste of nicotine in my mouth anymore. But wait a minute, I'm still getting to hold something in my hands, but instead of a pen, it's a Granny Smith. Wow, I've lost some weight. I can walk up and down a flight of steps and not have to breathe heavy. My teeth are white instead of yellow. Wow, I've changed. I've evolved, okay? And now this craving, that's the external factor, is, wow, you know what? I actually like having white teeth. I actually like not smelling like a pack of Newports every time I walk into a room. You know what? I have a little bit extra money because I'm not spending $8 every 2 days on a pack of cigarettes. I can really buy that nice pair of Jean Fluvog shoes that I've always wanted with all the extra money that I've saved. Or I can buy that tent so I can go camping in the summertime. You see where I'm going with this, okay? So, again, racism and white supremacy for a lot of people has become a habit. So you have to change the habit. So, so if you're a Karen and you see a black person, it's, well, wait a minute. Your first instinct is, oh, he's black, must be doing something fucked up. Let me call the cops. Instead of that, ask a question. Hey, can I help you? Is there something you need from me? What's happening? Okay? And this whole conversation, this whole situation in Central Park could have been avoided if all she had to do was put the dog on a damn leash. That's all she had to do. But instead of that, she didn't even say that. She said, you're harassing me. Okay? You're harassing me. Because the cues that have been implanted in her mind was, okay, black man, threat. Okay? So we have to go ahead and now change the paradigm of when white people look at black people to have us not be a threat. Okay? Because if we're not looked at as a threat, we won't take the necessary actions to eliminate the threat. And the elimination of that threat in terms of black people is the police. Look at what we've been talking about for all of this time. Okay? So now the routine. Okay, black person, white woman, in the past it's been, oh, I'm threatened. Maybe not, don't be threatened this time around. Be conversational, okay? Be engaging. Be welcoming. Be friendly without necessarily being their friend, because you still don't know them. But be friendly without being their friend. Because if you're not perceived if you don't perceive a black person as a threat, the chances of you taking action to eliminate that threat will be reduced and eliminated. Okay? So now you've changed the routine. Instead of calling the cops, you'll say, hey, look, what's happening? Is there a problem? Did I do something wrong? Let's talk about this. The reward. Okay, hey, guess what? I didn't lose my job. I didn't lose my dog. I don't have to be the butt of national jokes and a meme on a bunch of memes around the internet, and I still had some personal and human dignity because I didn't stoop to as low as to be a steaming racist. Okay? The reward also for Christian Cooper is, oh, wow, I'm alive. I didn't get shot by the cops. Okay? Now, the craving in that sort of habit loop of trying to dismantle a Karen, the craving is, well, wait a minute, if I feel this good about being able to keep my job and keep my dog and keep my way of life and not be embarrassed around the world, all because I was willing to have a conversation because I didn't view a black man as a threat. You know what? Maybe I can do, maybe I don't have to do, maybe I can do this with Asians. Maybe I can do this with my Latino brothers and sisters. Maybe I can do this with Jewish people. Maybe I can do this with people. Maybe I can do this with the First Nations community. Maybe I don't have to view them as a threat. Okay? Do you see how this works? So if you change the habit, if you change the line of thinking, if you change the way these sort of instinctual reactions that white women seem to have, you can repair a Karen, okay? And a Karen eventually becomes a Catherine or a Joanna or a Kim, okay? And then Catherine, Joanna, and Kim go to their communities. And this is part of the answer to your question. They go to their communities and they influence their social groups. Okay? Mm-hmm. They influence their social groups. They do their research. They ask questions to other black people, but not necessarily in a condescending way as if black people are expected to know everything about black people. But you ask questions. You own up to your mistakes. You're like, hey, you know what, man, I fucked up. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call the cops on you. You know what? That was really shitty. You know what? When you see a black person and you're a Karen and you clutch your purse and you see them walk past you again, stop them on the street next time and you say, hey, you know what, brother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to clutch my purse. I thought you were a threat. You're not a threat. You're just going to work just like me. I'm sorry, and I'll do better. I won't do this again. Okay? If you had kids, teach. Okay? Again, this whole sort of, these Karens don't start because and they ask mommy and daddy to borrow their Porsche for the weekend. Okay? It doesn't start when they're 16. It starts when they're 4, 5, and 6. They're taught early, and that's how these habits get formed. In the book, The Power of Habit, they talk about the 10,000-hour rule, where if you practice a particular endeavor for over 10,000 hours, you become proficient and then evolve into becoming an expert. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if you practice these sort of behaviors that create a Karen, or if you're in an environment that produces Karens, naturally you're going to be a Karen. It's going to be easy for you. So when the moment comes to be a Karen, it's instinct. You don't have to learn it. You don't have to think about it because it becomes almost as easy as breathing. And it's ironic I say it's almost as easy as breathing because George Floyd died and his last words were, I can't breathe. And again, it's that white supremacy, again, is this sort of virus that it's killing America. It's killing America. It's killing America. You know? Yeah. It's killing America. Absolutely. And it's in Canada's not too far behind. Okay? You know, some other people, some other things that white people can do is acknowledge your privilege. You did a wonderful job of that earlier, Catherine. You were like, you know what? Hey, I know that I'm a privileged white woman. What can I do differently? Okay? And one of the things you can do, again, is ask questions. What can I do differently? How can I get help? All right? Keep an eye out when you see other acts of racism. Okay? When you see other acts of racism, you know, if you see something, say something. Yeah. It's that easy. Sure. It's like when you go on the subway, it's like, okay, well, whoa, that guy, there's a suspicious package on this train car. Wait a minute, hold on. I could call somebody about it. If you see something, say something. If you see an act of racism, say something about it. And then when you say something about it, do something about it. Okay? Do something about it. Try to understand that other person's experience. Okay? And earlier on in this conversation, I talked about the 4 fights. Okay? Part of the reason why I thought about those 4 fights is because white people need to understand what black people have been dealing with. And if I could relate the current white struggle to the already pre-existing black struggle, that will help white people understand black people's struggle. Okay? So if you understand someone else's experiences, it helps you understand how you can, I don't want to say be better because that's a qualitative statement, and it's not about being better. It's about growing and evolving. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot there, and it was so fruitful, and I really appreciate that conceptual sort of tool of like routine and practice, and I can't remember all the
It's
words you
cue,
mentioned, but
routine, reward. It's
yeah,
the
thank
name of the
you.
book is called The Power of Habit, and it's I mean I just gave away the book in 45 seconds, but it's cue and three-letter Q, not five. Cue, routine, reward, and it's the habit loop, and the
The
external
habit loop,
factor
right, right.
that habit loop, and the external factor that fuels the habit loop is a craving.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a craving, and kind of getting and again, white supremacy is so part of society. Even some of the language that we use. Okay, my second master's degree is in a discipline of healthcare, but it was part of the interpreting and translation studies department. So I had to take all of these linguistics courses as a result of finishing up a second master's degree. But even the language that we use in certain instances, some of the idioms that we use are steeped in racism, and we don't even know it. We're just saying these things, and it's just like, oh yeah, hey, you know what? For example, when you say, when you use the phrase, oh, grandfathered in, people don't know actually where that phrase actually came from, okay? That phrase came from voting rights back in the 1860s and 70s, where if you were a white person but didn't necessarily meet all the qualifications to vote, okay, as long as you had a grandparent that voted before, I think, 1867, you, that person that didn't necessarily meet all the qualifications to vote, were allowed to vote. And that naturally was a form of voter suppression against black people, okay, who were on the way to receiving the right to vote, okay? So that's where the phrase grandfathered in comes from. It's like, okay, people don't even realize some of this stuff. Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell book called The Tipping Point. The tipping point is from one side to the other, okay? It's basically, look, there's a whole lot of black people moving into this white neighborhood. We white people gotta move out. That sort of tipping point of when there's a specific number of people, black people in a community, where there's in a white community, that sort of number where you go over the edge, that's the tipping point. And that tipping point led to another phenomenon called white flight. Okay? Like the tipping point. Or the peanut gallery. All right? Anything from the peanut gallery. The peanut gallery comes from the vaudevillian days, where the cheap seats were mostly the seats where black people and poor people could only afford. Okay? And people used to throw peanuts at performers when they didn't like what they were performing. In many instances, the performers were also black people. Okay? And black people didn't necessarily have the best seats. So you would throw your peanut towards the stage, and if you didn't hit the stage, you would land in that area where peanuts landed, right where the black people were sitting. And that gallery area was called the peanut gallery. Okay? So even with some of the language that we use, we're not even got to take it within from a white feminism point of view, okay? The phrase rule of thumb. Do people understand where the phrase rule of thumb actually comes from? Care to take a guess?
I don't know that one, but I'm sure it's racist in
Okay.
its roots. Yeah.
It's sexist, because here's what happened. It's again an example of male patriarchy. This toxic patriarchy. Okay, here's what happened. Years ago, it was legal to beat your wife. Okay, it was legal to beat your wife with a stick, as long as it was no thicker than your thumb. Thus, the rule of thumb. That's what happened. So women were getting
Wow.
beaten with sticks, and it was legal to beat your wife as long as if you beat your wife with a lead pipe, okay, no, that's wrong, can't do that. But if you beat your wife with a stick that's not wider than this, okay, it's all good. That's where rule of thumb came from. Again, people don't even understand some of the fucked up language that we use that oppresses people. And when it applies to
For
black
sure.
people, the phrase "sold down the river" was like, hey, if you were an inferior slave or you wanted to swindle somebody out out of money, you say, hey, you sold them down the river. Well, some slaves were literally sold down the Mississippi River to other plantations. That's what that means. That's what that phraseology comes from. And people don't really understand how language affects obviously it's an important part of communication, because communication at its most fundamental level is the transfer of meaning and understanding of meaning. And the words that we use convey a certain meaning and a certain understanding. Okay? So we have to make sure that we are using different words, because the words that we speak and eventually become the actions and intentions that we manifest. And if we want to manifest a different reality, we always talk about speak it into existence. Well, yeah, but we have to speak positive stuff into existence. We don't want to say, hey, you know what? The peanut gallery. No. You know what?
Yeah.
Stop. Think about what you're saying before you say it.
No, you're totally right. And I think that language is so important.
We have two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Oh no, it's got cut off again.
We're okay. We're good. We're good.
Shoot, it's all cut up again. Oh, okay.
No. It's good. It's good. No, what I was saying was,
okay.
We have two ears and one mouth for a reason. You know what I'm saying? We have two ears and one mouth for a reason. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I say, like language is so important. And I think that is part of why education and learning and unlearning things within yourself as a white person is so important, because you uncover a lot of this stuff when you're learning about it, and being able to sort of figure out what language to use is so important. So yeah, it's beyond, like, there's so much to learn. We're running out of time. There's only 2 minutes left, but I just wanted to, I just wanted to mention as well that in sort of response to all of that, I think that the one thing that I want people to use this information for, especially white people, is to figure out how to be an ally and use that word as a verb instead of just, I guess,
instead of just a noun.
Like, just, yeah, exactly. Like, you have to figure out how to be an ally consistently, and you can fuck up, and you can, build different routines and use the habit loop, like you mentioned, to build those things as you're learning and going along. Yep. And so,
absolutely.
So yeah, that's a main takeaway that I feel like I can put out there as someone who is trying to do that myself.
Right.
And so the other thing is that there are a bajillion resources online for folks to access. There's even more right now because people are sharing them widely. You have a bunch of books on your highlights and your stories, which is great. And you posted a whole bunch of stuff in February.
And I've started another one now. Yep, and I started another one because people are asking me a whole lot more questions. And the first two books that I started with, this was book number 1, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I think that's quite timely.
Nice.
And today's book was this, From Here to Equality. Okay, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. Okay, so this one is actually really, really academic. There's a lot in this one. This one is a bit less academic, and the chapters are a bit shorter, so it's a bit more digestible in terms of consuming it to read. So I'll probably finish this one this week. This one might take a while, because this one, damn near textbook.
That's fair. Yeah.
Is what it is.
But you're doing it, and that's amazing. So we've only got 10 seconds left, so I just wanted to thank you again for having this conversation with me. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I love you. I love you. I love you.
Love you too.